world is in a severe crisis. We are already hovering on the brink of what appears to be a third world war, a global conflict. We are all aware of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, where the Americans are fighting the Russians by proxy. They are fighting to the last Ukrainian. And now, while even this war is dragged on into its fifth month, it's heading into its sixth month, we have another crisis which has already started brewing in the Taiwan Straits. As we all know that about a few days back, President Joe Biden of the United States and Xi Jinping of China had engaged in a virtual summit, more or less, in a long conversation over the video. Almost for over an hour, they spoke to one another. At that time, the visit of Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the American Senate, was scheduled, was due. There was talk that it would take place. Nothing definite had been said, but it was certainly being aired that Nancy Pelosi, was keen to visit Taiwan to show American solidarity and support with that, what the Chinese called renegade province. The visit had still not been finalized, but the talks were in the air. And that is the time Xi Jinping had clearly threatened America not to play with fire. Otherwise, you will get burnt. This was as direct a threat as any. Initially, it is said that President Joe Biden was very much against this trip because he felt, as it is made out, that this was a needless provocation to China, that they had their hands full with Russia and Ukraine already, and this was not the best of time to start another major conflagration with the Chinese. He had quoted his Chief of Staff, General Milley, to say that this was not a good idea. Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan was not exactly a very good idea. This is what he fired the gun from the shoulders of his Chief of Staff. But it is said that nevertheless Nancy Pelosi went ahead with her visit. Now, whether this was a staged difference of opinion or otherwise, the fact is that once China had so openly threatened the United States, it was virtually impossible for the United States as a superpower to back down or to be seen as backing down in front of a direct Chinese threat. So I think this decision was taken behind the scenes that Nancy Pelosi would go ahead with her visit. Only it wasn't announced in advance. People were kept guessing. It was kept vague and ambiguous. And then at the very last minute, it was announced that Nancy Pelosi is heading for Taiwan. All people, the entire global network was now following the flight of Nancy Pelosi's plane as she came over from the eastern side of Taiwan, so that would be the safest side to make an approach from. But, the Americans, the level of worry was that the Americans were even apprehensive that the Chinese, given their threat and bluster, may try and shoot down her plane. And therefore, 8 F-15 Eagle aircraft of the United States Air Force had taken off from Okinawa in Japan to escort Nancy Pelosi into Taiwanese airspace, to escort her to the landing at Taipei. And similarly, they escorted her out. Now, the simple fact is that the Americans didn't want to be seen as backing down. The Chinese equally have a great stake, because if they do nothing whatsoever, the Chinese would very definitely, their bluff would have been called in front of the whole world. It's looking like as if it is more or less being called, but it remains to be seen what China will do still. right? I do not think the Chinese wanted to confine it to a window of while Nancy Pelosi was there in Taiwan per se. That was just about a 2 days window. But they would extend their reaction to even beyond it. Americans had taken full precautions. They had mobilized about 4 carrier battle groups. One is in Japan, Okinawa, the second in the South China Sea, third is in Hawaii, and there's a fourth one waiting. They have 4 carrier battle groups. They were fully prepared. And China also went on a full-scale alert, military alert. There were lots of videos that the Chinese media showed of their tanks on the edges of the beach, on the waterline, etc., etc., their aircraft, their missiles firing, etc., live fire drills, all was being shown to intimidate, threaten, browbeat. So what we have seen is a game of brinkmanship between America and China. America went ahead because it was a direct challenge to America's, role as the greatest superpower on the earth. They have had loss of face in Afghanistan. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was a shamazel, more or less a military disgrace, which really, has eroded the American macho image all over the world. So they could not afford a second time. Therefore, with all this talk of, Joe Biden being against Nancy Pelosi's visit, and this visit has been played down very significantly in the American media and the Western media. Surprisingly, otherwise, the rest of the world was all talking about it, but they were trying to play it down. They were trying to say that, Newt Gingrich, the former 25 years ago, that speaker had come, so many other Congress persons have been coming. Nancy Pelosi went so far as to say why when the males came they said nothing, why only when a woman speaker has come are the Chinese getting so. She tried to give a sexist angle to this whole debate, and she was at pains to reiterate that America had not changed its one China policy. But say what you will, this was a direct affront, this was a direct challenge to China. Let's see you carrying out your threat that you are saying don't play with fire, you will get burned, so try and burn us. I mean, it was as simple as that. So now what could the Chinese have done? Let me give their stake. A stake analysis is called for. The 20th Chinese Communist Party Congress is shortly going to take place, where they will decide on an unprecedented third term for the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Third term. I mean, he wears all the hats now. He's party secretary, he's president, and he heads the Central Military Commission, chairman Central Military Commission. He is all three hats rolled into one, and he was looking for a third term. Can he afford to be seen as weak by his own domestic constituency? Can he afford to lose face in front of the whole world? I mean, the stakes are clear. So what would China do? Now, it is very difficult to, get into the minds of the Chinese and exactly without access to highly classified intelligence about what the Chinese Politburo is thinking, what the Chinese are thinking, what are the discussions in their Central Military Commission, what are the exact military moves that are taking place. All this is known to the United States and to the other countries involved because of their satellite surveillance and all these. They are not known in the open domain. So all that we can do in the open domain is to carry out an analysis of the matrix of options that the Chinese have to respond to what they clearly see as a dangerous American provocation. So what is this matrix of option? One, posture. This is exactly what they are doing right now. They have been doing military posturing for a very long time. They have been sending their aircraft to test the air defense identification zone of Taiwan. They make them scramble, but they go back. They don't go full hog. They don't press the attack or the incursion. That they have been doing. But will they be confined just to that? I don't think that would be, the Chinese themselves would consider it a macho enough response to justify the threats they were holding out to the United States of America very, very publicly. They have been doing that to the rest of the world, and the most of the world has been cowed down. They haven't dared to sort of cross Chinese red lines. But here America did. Nancy Pelosi came. Nancy Pelosi has gone back. What have the Chinese done so far? What can they do? So I will first outline the matrix of options, and then I'll try and hazard a guess of what they could actually be planning. Now, the matrix of options is one, posture. That means it can be broadly divided into non-kinetic and kinetic responses, right? So when we take the non-kinetic responses, they sponsor, number one. Number two, they have sent their units, naval units, to surround Taiwan from all sides. They could now suddenly, having surrounded Taiwan under the pretext of a live fire drill, which they are going to carry out just on the perimeter of their sovereign waters of Taiwan. You know, that 12 nautical mile belt, which is the coastal waters, which is the sovereign waters of Taiwan. They are at the edge of it. In some places they have violated little bit, but there are 5 Chinese flotillas now which have surrounded Taiwan from all sides. Well, they could certainly announce a blockade, and then the cat would be amongst the pigeons. If they say we are now enforcing a blockade of Taiwan, they've already stopped export or import of some Taiwanese goods, but they could now say that we are blockading Taiwan. So these are the matrix of non-kinetic options. What if they want to go further than just making faces, posturing? If they want to do something more serious, then the option is that they could fire a shot across the bow. From the lowest, they could graduate higher. So the lowest response option is that they fire a shot across the bow. They choose some Taiwanese military targets to attack with their tactical ballistic missiles. They fire them at Taiwan as a shot across the bow and say, if you want to stop here, well, this is a warning, right? And then they await to see what really happens thereafter. The second level in the kinetic response is there are a number of Taiwanese islands off the coast of China, very near to the Chinese coast. Some of these are, the Kinmen Island, the Matsu Islands, the Nangsha Islands, some in the Bakshi Channel, some in the Taiwan Straits, across the Taiwan Strait, very close to the Chinese mainland. China could just go simply and grab one of them to make a point. But there are pros and cons of what would happen thereafter. I mean, what would they really have achieved, to what purpose they would occupy that island, because it will still draw the matrix of American response, painting China. We have seen the American information warfare machine in very high decibel phase against the Russians, painting them as, going against the rules-based order, being aggressors, being Hitlers, being this, that. They would paint Xi Jinping the same color, massive psychological warfare offensive, propaganda offensive, information warfare offensive, and then of course followed by some more kinetic actions. So that is the second level of kinetic response. One, that you fire a shot across the bow with tactical ballistic missiles, engage Taiwanese target, not American targets, Taiwanese targets. Number two, take a offshore island. Number three, go for full-scale amphibious assault on Taiwan. Now let me first tell you about what would this full-scale amphibious assault across Taiwan involve. What would it look like? What would be the various stages of such a massive operation? We'll analyze whether they can do it or not a little later, but first let us say, what does it entail? A massive amphibious operation of invasion of Taiwan. Now, it was being said in the Chinese media that by 2025 they would be ready to do so. So, will the Chinese do this before they are ready or not, remains to be seen, number one. Number two, the Chinese economy is stalling. It's in a dangerous stall, right? And then the Chinese demography is going down because of the one-child policy. They are saying the 1.4 billion population of China is declining seriously. So there is a school of thought that they may have no further options now. This may be Just like this was the last chance for Russia, which is also facing a demographic decline. Very serious, even more serious than the Chinese. So the last chance they calculated was now. Demographically, beyond this, they could not have sustained an offensive. And even now, they are facing a serious manpower crunch, the Russians. They have mobilized 150,000 men. The Ukrainians have mobilized 250,000. And quite obviously, the strain on the Russian troops is showing. So there is a school of thought that the Chinese, economy is stalling, their demographic factors are in a decline. So will they also consider it their last chance to do something? And will they then dare to cross that Rubicon? That remains to be seen. So how will they cross that Rubicon? There will be cyber attacks to get down every single cyber network. They may even try and take out some critical American satellites, because then when they have to go whole hog, then they can't pull any punches. You see, then they would even, they would attack with their missiles, heavy missile barrages on Taiwanese airports, seaports, military targets, military concentrations, presidential palace, command and control nodes, etc. Heavy barrage of tactical ballistic missiles, cruise missiles and air attacks, right? And the Chinese Air Force would try and gain air supremacy over Taiwan. Then thousands of small crafts and boats would try and attack the beaches of Taiwan from all around. They would try and mount these assaults. Wherever they get a toehold or a foothold, then they would try and enlarge it. They would simultaneously try air assaults. Their airborne forces, their heliborne forces would try and seize airheads inland of vital, tactical locations. They would try and seize them to facilitate the marine assault. The marine assault would initially come by thousands and thousands of small craft. Then once they have gained secure toehold somewhere, then they would bring in their big amphibious assault ships to get in more, seize some Taiwanese ports and hold them as, their beachheads kind of a thing into that area, their footholds. From where they would advance inwards and try and link up with the airborne forces which have come in, and hopefully they would try and wear down the Taiwanese defenses before a serious retaliation can occur. What could the Americans do in response? The Americans could, steam up their aircraft carrier battle groups. And I have said the answer that the Chinese have found to the aircraft carrier battle groups is their Dongfeng 21C and 21D missiles of 2,000 to 3,000 kilometer ranges, which they will fire in barrages. We don't know how accurate they are, but they could fire them in barrages onto American aircraft carriers in the hope that if they can sink one or two, the loss of life will deter the United States from any major intervention. But that remains to be seen. They may then if they want to, if it is war, it is war. They may also have to engage with their Dongfeng missiles, longer range missiles, the American military bases in Okinawa, in Japan, getting Japan into the conflict, in Hawaii and in the other islands beyond their second chain. If the Dongfeng 21D and C missiles prove to be effective, if they are able to hit some of the big American aircraft carriers, then the American aircraft carriers may have to stay out of the range of the second chain of islands, outside the range of these missiles. From there, their aircraft can't, attack Taiwan or the Chinese mainland. So then their option would be to try and enforce a blockade of China with their submarines, and the American, the British, the French, the Australian, all these submarines put together, they could sink about 40% of Chinese shipping as it is coming towards their shore. They could put air and missile strikes on Chinese cities, but then the chances to a nuclear escalations are as crystal clear as daylight. There will be left no other option but a devastating, nuclear exchange between the two countries. It may start with tactical nukes being fired on the sea. Now, please remember that tactical nukes are difficult to fire on land because of population centers and the impact on population. But on the high seas, tactical nukes may just happen. It will be far easier on the high seas than it would be on land. So, as I was saying, you know, the chances of a nuclear escalation on sea, open seas, are far, far higher. What the world is facing is a very grim scenario. Most of the people think, as of now, most analysts think, that China may not go beyond posturing. Because the provocation is not so grave. The Americans are saying, look, our senators have been going there often, so what is the need for China to get so incensed now? The need for China to go so incensed now is domestic. Domestic because he is facing the 20th Chinese People's Party's Congress, where he has to be selected for a third term, unprecedented third term. He has to play to his domestic constituency. He can't be seen backing down in front of his domestic constituency. But in terms of provocation, in terms of the just war theory, is this such a grave provocation as to call for a full-scale assault? No, does not look like it really. So what will it be then? Will he just confine himself to posturing, but in a more dangerous manner? He's already surrounded the whole of Taiwan, and he could suddenly enforce a blockade, leaving the onus of striking the first shot onto the Americans. He could suddenly enforce a blockade. The other is that he goes sub-tactical. That means he fires a shot across the bow, a kinetic shot across the bow. One or two targets he takes out with his tactical ballistic missiles in Taiwan, military targets. But there is a huge level of risk of accidental escalation that the world has really to worry about, and that worry is not over. With Pelosi's going out, it's not over. Expecting the Chinese to attack an American target as sensitive as their leader of the American Senate trying to shoot her down, I don't think was what the Chinese had in mind. The Americans were also overreacting, but their fears were showing. Very certainly the fears of the American military were showing. They are engaged in the continent of Europe. Now they are engaged here. Most American think tanks, most American geostrategic thinkers like Professor John Mearsheimer, Professor Henry Kissinger, and a whole lot of others have clearly told them that we should not take on China and Russia together. It would be extremely bad strategic planning to take on Russia and China at the same time. It would be a failure of higher level direction of war in the United States if they provoke both of them at the same time. But we are suddenly seeing a new macho phase because the Americans seem to think that the Russians have underperformed, and therefore an amphibious assault is even more difficult. So China may not quite threaten that, so they are doing brinkmanship. They are trying to push. If push comes to shove, there could be an accidental escalation, which is the greatest worry. Now what about India? How does it affect India? To explain that, I would like to explain the tactical significance of the island of Taiwan, the island state of Taiwan. It is 80 kilometers or 80 miles from the Chinese mainland, like an unsinkable aircraft carrier. It prevents a breakout of the Chinese Navy into the Western Pacific Ocean and ipso facto also into the Indian Ocean. It's a big constraint on the Chinese Navy. Now don't forget that the Chinese Navy today has 350 ships. It has become bigger than the United States Navy at 290 ships. There's a clear edge that the Chinese have gotten in the total number of ships. Of course, the American Navy has a vast edge in terms of its 11 super carrier battle groups, aircraft carrier battle groups, Ronald Reagan and Ford and Nimitz class carriers. I mean, there are massive carriers, the biggest that the world has. In response, China only has 2 aircraft carriers right now. They are building their third and they are planning to go up to 5. But that would come somewhere beyond 2025. So will they wait for those 5 carriers to come up? What role would they play in an invasion when there would be great chances of their being sunk by a vastly superior American aircraft carrier fleet? What is the difference that the Dongfeng 21C and D missiles, aircraft carrier killer missiles, will play in this whole conflict? All remains to be seen. So the world is in a very dangerous situation. What the loss of Taiwan would have a great impact on the rest of the world, militarily, on Japan, India, Southeast Asia, very specifically on Vietnam, India, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, all these smaller countries in Southeast Asia, and on Japan and on India, and of course on America. You know, the entire Western Pacific seaboard would then be open for a breakout of the Chinese Navy. So that is the one threat that we have. It will not be in our interest to see Taiwan going down. The second thing that I'd like to point out is, look at the way China has been supporting our sworn enemy Pakistan. They gave them the blueprints of the nuclear bomb. They tested the first Pakistani bomb on Chinese soil in Lop Nor. Then they gave them the fissile material for the first 5 bombs. Then they gave them the the Chinese missiles, M9 and M11 missiles. And when the Americans imposed, sanctions under the MCTR, then they put Pakistan in touch with North Korea, from where they have got the Nodong and Taipodong missiles. They have made Pakistan a nuclear power. Look at the threat that poses to India. It poses an existential threat to India, the way the Chinese have gone out of the way to help Pakistan, despite our sensitivities. They haven't cared a whit for India's concerns. Pakistan is a country that has attacked India 4 times in the past, and then has been waging a proxy war non-stop for the last 30 plus years. To this country they have given this level of nuclear assistance, conventional military, all Pakistani tanks, mostly of Chinese origin, artillery guns, mostly of Chinese origin, Pakistani submarines, Pakistani frigates, Pakistani warships, Pakistani jet fighter aircraft, JF-17, now J-10s, and now they're planning to give them their latest, 5th generation fighter aircraft, the J-20. There are talks that they'll give that to the Pakistanis. So if this is the way Pakistan is being helped by China, why can't we play tit for tat and help Taiwan, Pakistan's sworn enemy, to the same level? If not at the same level, at least we can go out and we can sort of coordinate with them and help them. You see, the simple fact is, what Taiwan does for us is, number of Chinese divisions, corps, in fact, combined armies as they call them, the armies of China, they are being, they have all been diverted, and they are being used against Taiwan. They are poised against Taiwan. Once Taiwan falls, please don't forget, all those formations, Chinese military units, Chinese military equipment will be free for diversion and use against India. Therefore, we have a big stake that Taiwan doesn't fall like that, and that attack on Taiwan is deterred. If they want to merge, they merge by peaceful means and not by such an all-out assault, because that would be a very dangerous precedent, and it will destabilize the situation in the whole of Asia, if not in the rest of the world. So India should support Taiwan and pay China back in the same card for what it is doing to Pakistan. We haven't gone to the level of giving nuclear weapons to Taiwan. Even America has not done that. But the Chinese have done this against us by arming Pakistan to the teeth, creating a problem for us. So at some time we will have to pay China back in the same coin if it doesn't stop what it is doing in Pakistan. And we should make it very clear. Look, you have pulled no punches, you have not held back, you are not only helping Pakistan, you are posturing in Ladakh to help take the pressure off Pakistan. So India we have a congruence of interest with Taiwan, and we should act accordingly. Our trade is now up to $8 billion a year. Taiwan is the source of all the chip industry of the world. The bulk of the chips, the semiconductors are supplied by Taiwan. So we should cooperate with Taiwan in, getting a chip industry manufacturing base in India, helping them to sort of offshore some of their production to India. And, in these ways we can have strategic dialogues, we can have regional security dialogues, exchange of military personnel, so that we pay back China for its support to Pakistan. Those are the impacts and implications for India. It yet remains to be seen whether the Chinese will go beyond posturing. Will they cross the kinetic line? That remains to be seen. We will find out in the days to come. But I do think an all-out amphibious assault doesn't seem very feasible right now. It all depends on how much face Xi Jinping thinks he stands to lose. He can't do nothing. Doing nothing is not an option for China. Otherwise, it stands to lose face not only in Asia but in the whole world. The problem is, what can it do? What is it capable of? What would the reaction be? The world is passing through a very dangerous phase where the chances of accidental escalation are still inordinately high. Jai Bharat, Jai Hind.